Alrighty, so that leaves us free to talk now, Niles. And I said we were going to talk about your project, but let me throw it open and let you say anything you want about Akira Kurosawa, Sergio Leone, or The Magnificent Seven, or Seven Samurai, if any of those are meaningful topics for you.
Yeah, they are. Well, when you go to film school, The Seven Samurai is always one of those pinnacles of cinema that they make you watch and study. And one of the brilliant things about that film is it is like 2/3 character development, and then 1/3, the last third of it is just a battle.
Yeah.
So it shows how that is why it's, one of the reasons why it's so well studied is because it's very well done in that regard narratively, when so many movies these days have these kind of cardboard insipid cutout characters with no development whatsoever. So that's probably one of the reasons why you're drawn to that film, like so many others, because you really get into the characters.
Yeah, and what's really great about it is that so many of the actors in that film have done other films with the same director where they play very, very different characters. So I have seen Seven Samurai more than I've seen any other Kurosawa film. I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen it. But, I've seen all of those actors in other films playing very different roles. And it's just kind of shocking when I see them in different roles because they're such well-developed characters in Seven Samurai that they just feel like real people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why, in my time as an independent filmmaker, I made a couple short films, and one of them that we did casting for, and the casting process was such a drag that I kind of leaned a bit away from narrative, and I've kind of gone more into documentary work because just the nature of people that I've been lucky to spend time with are such interesting characters themselves that it's almost like you bypass the casting process. So that's one of the things that really draws me to documentary, like people that you would have on your podcast, for example. A lot of them are so interesting. You just kind of put them in front of a camera and go, and you get a lot of amazing depth and range out of them without having to do this whole kind of casting deal. So that's one thing that documentary really draws me. That's one of the reasons I'm really drawn towards that medium.
No casting.
No casting. Yeah,
and unless you're doing a documentary about the film industry, no actors either.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I think, documentary filmmaking is, it's a way to kind of partially be a journalist, but then partially kind of insert my background. I have a background working in Hollywood, kind of doing a lot of slick work for the high-end kind of commercial industry in Los Angeles, and then the Hollywood visual effects industry, and then even some work in the game cinematic industries, which led me to have a very high bar for visual quality. So the style of kind of filmmaking work that I'm doing these days is trying to incorporate some of that high production value into kind of documentary work, because a lot of documentaries look very low production value. So the show that we're going to talk about now, which is kind of the latest project out, is very much trying to do that, where it's trying to be a piece of shamanic media that also looks really high-end in terms of its production value and a very professional presentation.
Well, it does look very high-end. I was watching the first episode this morning, and I'm going to play the trailer for that first episode. Now, unfortunately, people listening on the radio will not be able to appreciate the high visual production quality, but I hope they'll be intrigued just the same. So here we go.
Indigenous people across the globe have used sacred plants and animal medicines for millennia to heal, illuminate, and connect them to the web of life. Traditionally, each culture had a healer that works on behalf of their patients, what we call the shaman. And now we find ourselves in a global village. Is it any wonder that we need our own healers that understand the deep power and sacredness these ancient earth medicines can reveal? My name's Rak Razam, and I'm an author, filmmaker, and shamanic facilitator. Join me as I interview and sit in ceremony, experiencing healing medicines with Western shamans across the globe. Watch firsthand as I document a modern shamanic resurgence being passed on from indigenous tribes to a new wave of medicine people working in the 21st century. This is Shamans of the Global Village.
Alrighty, that was the trailer for Shamans of the Global Village. If you want to see the trailer, just go to the website, shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. This is a production, a meeting of two minds. Rak Razam, who's been on the C-Realm podcast, but not on the C-Realm radio show, so he's not a familiar voice to at least the local listening audience. And Niles Heckman, who I have here on the line. So, Niles, what were we just hearing in that trailer?
Yeah, so this show kind of came about as exactly a meeting between Rak and I. Rak is very much a experiential journalist and has, done a lot of writing on ayahuasca culture, which I know you're familiar about, KMO, and went down originally to the Amazon over a decade ago to do an article on ayahuasca, which turned into a book about ayahuasca, which turned into a documentary about ayahuasca called Aya Awakenings. And, in that 10-year history with being a journalist, talking a lot about entheogenic culture and kind of shamanic culture, it's become very much a huge part of his life. And he has a podcast called In a Perfect World, where he interviews a lot of people in the culture, in the community, and, a lot of people that are doing shamanic practices, either through the lineage of ancient tribes or kind of have retaken up that practice in the West, which is very much what the show is now highlighting, because there is very much a resurgence of this happening, which of course will not be televised. But it was a combination of like he and I coming together, where he has this background kind of in the community and I have this background in Hollywood, just trying to work on more conscious projects and not these kind of, vanilla milquetoast things blowing up and people fighting and, explosions happening all over the place. So I'm just trying to do more kind of deep work that isn't just this base chakra work. And so we came together and, conceptualized this pilot for this episodic series, as is said in the trailer, which is kind of a nice summary of it. It's basically a independently produced series focusing on indigenous entheogenic medicines and this resurgence of shamanic practices happening in the quote unquote industrialized first world. So we shot the pilot episode in Mexico in 2015, and here we are almost in 2017. And yeah, we've released it online as an independent series. And that's very much the dynamic these days with any sort of content as an artist, is just going straight to audience and kind of bypassing the middlemen. And the way the show's going to lay out is we're hoping and intending to do a whole series, at least one season. But because it's just an independently made show, we've only made the pilot episode at this point in time. But each episode, the idea is to have focus on a specific medicine person, a shaman, working with a specific medicine. So the pilot episode highlights the work of a gentleman named Dr. Octavio Redig, who is a Western-trained physician in Mexico, a Mexican general practitioner, who has rediscovered the lineage of the Sonoran desert toad. And so that's the medicine that's in the toad, which is the focus of the first episode.
All right. Well, there was a lot there when what you just said. I'm hearing an echo of my voice. You're not, hopefully you're wearing a headset. I don't know if the listeners are hearing it as well. Are you just sitting in front of a computer with no headset? Okay, good. There it's gone.
I'm not. I've got my headphones on.
Okay, good. Let's not dwell on it. It seems to have gone away. So, in what you were just what you were just saying about the project, it was a fairly dense communication for people who are not primed to unpack it. So, people listening in the future, on the internet, who are subscribed to the C-Realm RSS feed, they probably had no trouble whatsoever following what you were saying. But for the local listening audience here on the radio, I want to back up a little bit, all the way to the very beginning where you talked about how, ayahuasca and other entheogenic medicines are infiltrating and sort of penetrating mainstream consciousness in the industrial first world, so-called, but that it's not being televised. And that's I think a reference to Gil Scott Heron's The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And I was reminded that things that are just on TV, that are primarily distributed via TV, are largely irrelevant because they are aimed mostly at old people who are not comfortable with new technology. But for so many young people, even if they do watch mainstream television, like I'm excited about, season 7 of The Walking Dead, so much of the experience is online. And if you want to communicate with people who are interested in The Walking Dead, you don't have to get on TV to find them. You can just put out a product and they will find you. And so, the fact that the revolution will not be televised is less of an impairment for the revolution than it used to be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's a good point. I mean, to back up on this, for those that aren't even at all completely familiar with shamanism, I mean, shamanism is something that has essentially been around for millennia, and it's basically not only, I don't want to say it's the world's oldest religion, but it's the kind of most direct form of spirituality and engaging with the intelligence and the spirit of the earth in all its forms. So that's done in certain, quite a few different ways, but indigenous cultures have kind of kept the lineage of shamanism for millennia because they haven't been so much a part of kind of the imperial kind of takeover of people coming in and co-opting practices. So, for example, you might find some indigenous tribe that has a specific medicine person who is essentially a shaman. And for those that aren't familiar, like you heard in the trailer there, you hear this singing, this chanting. And so what typically a shamanic experience is you having either sitting down in a circle or sitting with a shaman, and the shaman's voice is kind of the guiding light for an experience that you have, whether or not there is a sacrament, or sometimes there isn't even a sacrament. Sometimes it's just the shaman taking a sacrament, which is essentially an earth-based medicine to have a either healing process or an expansion of consciousness process. And as you're going through that process, that voice you heard in the trailer, that singing, that was Octavio, the focus of the first episode, singing, doing his chants that help guide you through the experience.
People familiar with ayahuasca rituals will be familiar with the Icaro, which is a power song that the curandero will sing in order to accomplish a variety of things. Sometimes summoning entities to help with the process, sometimes for clarifying vision or intensifying visions. Something that most of my experience around shamanism is in the context of ayahuasca shamanism in the Peruvian Amazon. And I've been down there 4 times and participated in a great many ceremonies, and almost always came away disappointed in terms of the intensity and vividness of the visions I was seeking. But always I would get some sort of benefit or reward for my patience and my endurance, because a lot of these entheogens, and we should say that entheogen is a term that was coined a couple decades back to sort of get away from all of the baggage that the term psychedelic was weighed down with. An entheogen is something that produces the divine either from within you or kindles it within you, but that's the basis of the word, entheogen, inside divinity. But most of my experience with this sort of activity did take place in South America, and it can be a real ordeal. I mean, it's not just a happy, take drugs and trip for a while and then, go to sleep in your hut and wake up the next day and swap stories with your friends. It can be really, really physically challenging, with a lot of vomiting and discomfort and, perhaps diarrhea and vomiting at the same time, which can be a real a memorable experience. And then some of the psychological aspects of it, or the visual elements of it, can be really, really intense and seemingly punishing and unforgiving. But the next day, it's all good. I wonder what was your introduction to the scene?
Well, it was interesting. I guess, I have a podcast that is a little side thing I do that about, Camo. You've been on the podcast. And I think I probably initially met Rak through the podcast. It's kind of one of my ways of reaching out to people whose material I like, and then kind of offering to do a conversation with them that kind of is a nice little promotional piece.
Podcasts are good for that.
I think we kind of connected up because oh, what's that?
I said podcasts are good for that. Having a podcast is a good excuse for reaching out to the people you want to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. As you're one of the most prolific podcasters on the internet, you're the last person I have to tell that to. But, so we kind of connected up in that regard. And it's something where, the beauty of shamanism is that obviously it's been very, in the West, it's full of a lot of stigmas and a lot of dogmas. And, people that don't know anything about it think that, it could be something where you're just promoting drugs and blah, blah, blah. But what it really is it's a direct experience to something greater, something larger. And like you said, it's not about tripping out and having some sort of just recreational drug experience, because these things are not recreational. And again, the reason why you would want to do something like this is for some sort of healing or some sort of expansion of your consciousness. So if you're in some sort of rut or some sort of, life has just got you down living in the grind of kind of the Western world, the hamster wheels of commerce and modernity, taking a shamanic medicine, if you feel the call to something like that, could be a nice process to just kind of up your cell phone signal momentarily. And like you said, which is very, very wise, it's not about permanently going off and taking endless shamanic medicines, because we're all in this realm for a reason. And, the real work is in this realm. But at the same time, I can only speak directly of my own personal shamanic experiences, which because of, this show, which actually turned into a very life-changing process for me making it, which is a whole another, separate 3-hour conversation. I've found some of these experiences to just be absolutely some of the most cherishable things that I've had in my life. And I know what you mean by sometimes it's you go down or you have an experience and it can be not all cracked out to be, but at the same time, some of these things can be absolutely, completely life-transforming experiences if you're willing to actually go forth and have some of them for the healing process. Because a lot of people in the Western world are in need of a lot more healing than we think.
Yeah, that's actually something I think that is covered in that first episode of the podcast. Who's the guest there? Dr. Octavio, what's his last name?
Dr. Octavio Rettig, Rettig is his name.
And he works with the so-called venom of the Sonoran desert toad, which requires no processing whatsoever. You just extract it from the toad, it dries into a sort of crystalline form, and you put it in a pipe and smoke it. And it contains 5-MeO-DMT, which is one of the most powerful psychoactive substances known. My one experience with it was not in a shamanic context, and it was not the least bit pleasant. Not anything I would want to repeat, although I might be willing to try it under expert guidance. But did you get to sample that medicine?
Yeah, I did. Basically, the episode crescendos in a ceremony that like to highlight what you just said, KMO. You can always maybe come across some of these medicines, which is what they really are. I'm referring to these things that some people might refer to as drugs as medicines. And I like to use that term because that's kind of the lineage of them in terms of how the indigenous people have always used them. And the West kind of takes things and just turns them into drugs because there's no spiritual context to them.
Right.
So if you use them in the right respect and setting, and you aren't just kind of haphazardly doing it for recreational purposes, if you're doing it in a container of a ceremony, like we have at the end of the episode, basically the end of the episode concludes in a medicine ceremony with the elders from the village who are tied in with the lineage of the area of the Sonoran Desert where the toads are, and it's their local land. And Octavio has been working with the local indigenous community, which is something that we're going to try and highlight in every episode. The point of the show, obviously, is to kind of raise awareness about shamanism, show some of these practices in very amazing cinematic ways. And I think we shot 3 or 4 things in the first episode that have almost never been seen on camera before. And also, kind of dispel some of the misinformation that's been out there about shamanism, and also show that if you do it in the proper context, in the proper set and setting is what it's called, in kind of a ceremonial context, it can be an unbelievably beautiful and life-changing transformation experience, because the respect that you put into it is oftentimes the respect that you'll get out of it. So it's very much to do with your kind of intent and your subconscious mind and how that all plays together. But I know it's hard for somebody that hasn't had any experience with the shamanic practice, but the beauty of shamanism overall is it's a very esoteric practice in the sense that it's about your direct experience and you directly connecting to something rather than, just having somebody tell you something that you need to believe in.
I'm old enough that I remember the previous term for shamanism that was popular in the West. It was witch doctor. And, if you say witch doctor, at least somebody of my age is likely to think of a villain from a Tarzan film.
Yes.
But the shaman he plays a role beyond just, villainous cackling and casting spells on people and, possibly, hopefully doing a little curative work. What are the other roles of the shaman?
Well, that's the thing. You raise a good point with shamanism where, shamanism's not perfect. And today, because of everything being commoditized in capitalism that we're kind of suffering through now in a lot of ways, shamanism has been very commoditized. So people go down to the Amazon and, want to take a plant medicine and it's all, turned into something that it was originally not intended to be. So in terms of that, I mean, it's very important to do these things with somebody that's very reputable and honorable. And kind of just to deter from your question a bit at the moment, KMO, like, you know, a large part of Rak's responsibility on this show is choosing the medicine people per episode as people that are very honorable, kind of stand-up people of balance and solidity, that are somebody that is it's like kind of choosing your doctor, right? Like where you're choosing somebody to have this experience with, that's it's very important who you do it with, because there is a lot of kind of negative experiences that happen with people if they don't do it in the right container or right context with the right person. So the person that you have the experience with is kind of a crucial part of that set and setting. And they have a large, you know, variety of roles in the sense of, after you have the experience, I mean, integration can be such a huge dynamic where you've essentially kind of unplugged from the matrix momentarily, and then you're kind of suddenly back in your matrix pod. It's really nice if you can have people to bond to and talk to. So part of what Rak does as a shamanic facilitator, he helps kind of facilitate people's experiences on the backside after they've had plant medicine experience, and you know, help kind of reintegrate and reground them back, you know, when they come back to this reality, this realm.
Now, I notice part of the show is you're specific to Western shamans, or basically shamans not from, you know, an indigenous tradition, or maybe they might partake of an indigenous tradition, but they definitely have a foot in the modern world. And I think that's probably pretty important to the project. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, well, Rak is an Australian and I'm from California. So, of course, neither one of us, as two white guys talking about shamanism, it's kind of funny, like, neither one of us both of us speak only English, so we know that the show would have to be done in English. So the idea for the show is obviously to highlight how there's been a resurgence of shamanic practices that have been very sensitive with indigenous people. I mean, indigenous people are very sensitive to Westerners coming in and co-opting a tradition that they feel is something that they've held a legacy to, and it's very understandable. But at the same time, in the episode, Octavio highlights a beautiful point, which is that we used to be a global shamanic culture, and we will one day return to being a global shamanic culture, as it seems like I really feel internally that we're on these kind of cycles of time where we, you know, our entire species kind of goes down in consciousness and raises up in consciousness. So as we kind of return to being more of a global shamanic culture, shamanism is everybody's. You know, shamanism was once all over the entire planet. I mean, there were, you know, the Druids or the like indigenous people of Europe, and there are still very much shamans happening there today, but it has been kind of really reduced since what it used to be. So that's kind of a dynamic with the practice where there's a resurgence of it happening in terms of Westerners. And we know that since it's an English-speaking show, obviously we're going to have to highlight people that are not necessarily just English speakers. Octavio's primary language, the gentleman who's the focus of the first episode, he's a Mexican, but he does speak English. But a key part of that is that because of the lineage of the indigenous people, we're going to try and do our best to have each person that's a focus per episode have the approval from the indigenous community or have worked through the indigenous community, for example. So it's not just like somebody that's gone off and, you know, claimed that there's something that hasn't had the lineage. It's like they've gone through the proper, you know, education practice and proper kind of like practice to be schooled by wise elders who have the lineage and the respect of what the indigenous people have brought to these medicines. That's kind of the goal per person that we're highlighting, even though, you know, each person will probably be, if not a Westerner, then somebody that has worked in, you know, is an English-speaking person, I should say.
I've got a friend who lives in Iquitos, Peru. His name is Alan Shoemaker. And he has been there for a couple decades now, and he makes his living connecting spiritual seekers, you might say. Other people would say ayahuasca tourists, although he hates that term, with indigenous, you know, qualified, vetted indigenous practitioners. And there are, well, Alan's opinion is that the people who come to South America from North America or from Europe or, you know, from Australia in search of the ayahuasca experience are often more spiritually advanced people than the practitioners to whom they are submitting themselves. You know, they're giving over power to this curandero or this ayahuasquero who himself might not be all that interested in, you know, higher states of being or, exercising his darker side. He might actually have a well-developed darker side that has quite an agenda, behind what he's presenting. And so it seems that, and some of the best experiences that I have had with these medicines have either been with Westerners who were directing, or leading the ceremony, or who were there on hand to sort of be an intermediary between these, potentially vulnerable sheep of, the ayahuasca tourists and the potentially predatory local curandero. And sometimes, the intermediary has had to step in and say, okay, that's enough of that. You're fired, basically, get out. Sometimes that needs doing. So it seems to me that there's assuming that the person in the jungle who mixes up this brew and who had a grandfather who did it and has been doing it all his life to project a lot of I don't want to say new age, but a lot of spiritual presuppositions onto this person is it's a type of bias. It's not necessarily a negative bias or, a bias that you're holding against somebody, but it's in some ways not fair to assume that they're going to have the same mentality and goal-oriented perspective on the use of these medicines that somebody who has traveled there from afar has.
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly. And, to talk about that, it's a very good point, where it's the sense like we highlighted earlier. Your real work is here, and we're all here in this realm for a reason. And I think a big part of that is our life growth, and it's almost like a training ground for bettering yourself. And you might want to say something like maybe your soul has transited here to kind of learn and grow. And when you have an experience where you've kind of gone elsewhere for a bit, I agree with somebody that we very much know, or highlight, and whose work we appreciate, KMO, I know, is Terence McKenna, who said something beautiful about shamanism, or the psychedelic experience, where you don't have to have psychedelic experiences to really become a very knowledgeable, deep spiritual being. But at the same time, if you've never even had one, it's like going from cradle to grave a virgin. So having an experience that's in the right context with somebody that is of honor, it can be just the most beautiful life-changing experience. Or it can be a very kind of negative experience. So yes, you hear stories about women that go down to have some sort of shamanic experience and get accosted or something like that. So it's really nice to if you're a feminine energy, to do a shamanic experience with a fellow feminine energy, for example. And there's legacy of powerful women's shamanic circles all doing it together in a container of purely women and things like that. But so, there is that dynamic, but nothing without, great reward doesn't come with a bit of risk. So on the same side of that, on the opposite side of that coin, I should say, if you do find somebody that is an amazing person, and I can only speak to my experiences, of course, but in the 3 or 4 kind of medicine people that I've had direct experience working with have been very good. And all of my experiences have been amazingly, something that I will always cherish so much. But at the same time, it's a good point, because I don't need to keep doing these things over and over again. It's kind of like you do them to an extent where you get a certain level of attainment, and then you're kind of off and you're back to your real work in this realm, I would say. And another good point about that is that if you need to do inner work on yourself before you can kind of go off and have some of these experiences. If you're just kind of Joe Sixpack and you happen to have one of these experiences, you're just going to come back and still be Joe Sixpack. The real work is what you do on yourself, and the attainment that you bring to it in terms of the bettering of yourself here is only something that a shamanic medicine can kind of help you with a little bit. It's all about really what you do on yourself in your day-to-day life. And I think that's part of the true development of you, is kind of always trying to better yourself as a better person day in, day out.
The oft-repeated metaphor is that taking these medicines is like taking a helicopter to the top of the mountain that other people climb. You get the view, you see what it's all about, but getting there by helicopter is not the same as getting there through arduous practice over a long period. But the two methods are quite complementary.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the mystery schools taught, or maybe still teach, which you could say is the real work is what your spiritual growth is day in, day out, and how you actually work all the time on yourself internally to better develop yourself. And if you have some sort of experience that is just quickly getting you somewhere, the beauty of it is you don't have to meditate for 30 years to have some amazing, power opening experience. So that's the beauty of plant medicines, is they can very quickly get you somewhere and show you something profound. So for example, the medicine that's the focus of the first episode, 5-MeO-DMT, which is what's in the toad, is a very beautiful way of kind of using it as a laser to kind of cut through life negativity, I found. So if you're stuck in a rut, or if you're just down and out, or you're just not sure about life, I found that the toad medicine is an amazing way to just kind of give you a positive boost, and then also to give you a much larger realization on what is a deeper reason of why you're here as a human being. And that's kind of the expansion of consciousness aspect about it. And that's the thing, is like, when we call these things medicines, it's not like a pharmaceutical drug that's just a bunch of chemicals that a company has made to kind of make profits primarily, and then, treat, not cure a symptom. It's not like I have a cold, I'm sick, I need medicine. Entheogenic medicine, or plant medicine, an earth-based medicine, I'll use a line from John Carpenter, while we were talking about movies came out, I'll use a line from John Carpenter's brilliant film, They Live, where you yourself may be in this realm living in somewhat of an artificially induced state of consciousness, which resembles sleep. So if you take a medicine like this, and for example, the most powerful entheogen in the world that we know of is what's in the toad, this can be a huge blow open for you to realize that there's more to reality than you think. So that's the real medicine. That's a real medicine experience, is this kind of head opening, consciousness expanding experience. Because obviously part of what we're highlighting in the show is, we're in a species crisis moment here environmentally, and, our society is completely kind of bankrupt in a lot of ways, philosophically, spiritually. And so these things are a nice recipe to help show you something that then you bring back to this realm and do the work here on yourself day to day.
It's easy to be cynical and sort of put off when we see people taking things from indigenous contexts and bringing them and sort of providing them as a service to wealthy Westerners. Are you familiar with what's his name? The husband and wife team behind the movie Thrive, Gamble, Foster Gamble, and I think his wife's name is Kim.
Not directly.
Okay, well,
I know the movie Thrive. I think I've seen it.
Yes, it's a movie that basically weaves a lot of valid criticism about the current state of the world with sort of silly conspiracy theories, basically saying the aliens are here to give us free energy and the evil forces are keeping us from it. But they've now latched on to ayahuasca, and they're promoting their ayahuasca experience. And I've seen little clips of the new movie they're trying to sell about it, and they've gone to a very, very what looks like a posh spa. A very well manicured and service oriented sort of thing where they're going to drink ayahuasca with a supposed shaman, and might very well be a very well qualified shaman, but still, just seeing the environment when I've all of my ayahuasca experiences have either been like on a poured concrete floor or in a hut, up on stilts out in the jungle, and to see somebody doing it in this really posh setting. I realize the medicine still works. You can take it out of the jungle, take it to New York City and drink it there, and it still works. But it brings up something really cynical in me when I see people doing it in such opulence and such luxury.
Yeah, and that's like if you see some sort of guru character. There's I can't remember this person's name, and I probably won't even need to say the name, but there's some guru person that lives in a 14,000 square foot house. So that tells you a lot, right? When somebody is so over the top materialistic here, that I think in order to have any sort of amazing, beautiful, direct connection with the divine, you don't need anything except yourself and your ability and willingness to engage your own will to have a beautiful experience. And maybe, a little old shaman in a little hut in the jungle or in the desert. So being materially opulent or materially in excess is kind of the opposite of anything in terms of what I would think is, I don't want to say true spirituality and sound dogmatic, but you know what I mean. I agree with what you're saying, dude, is that it's very much, it doesn't matter materially what's here. It's more about, your state of mind going into it. So when you see things in this realm, on this planet, that are so materially excess, that are all about, fundraising or gathering community money. Of course, we all need to kind of make our way in commerce today, but something that is all about more something that's trying to be more of a political institution or more of a fundraising institution rather than giving people their own direct experiences. That says a lot for sure.
I realize that I'm just displaying my my own prejudices when I call out the people who do ayahuasca under luxurious circumstances. One could say that I'm fetishizing austerity or fetishizing poverty or assigning a spiritual value to poverty, which I think is probably a bad move.
Yeah, well, and I think wasn't it you that had a statement on the sea realm that you've said numerous times where there's a lot larger of a difference between quality of life and what is it?
Standard of living.
And standard of living, yes. Well, there you go, exactly. And so, I think so many people in the Western world are on these treadmills of just stress, work, which is not a mistake, I would argue. But, I think a lot of people are kind of becoming a bit more conscious materially, where you see the rise of things like the tiny house movement, for example, where people realize that they don't need a big, house full of crap that is going to eventually sit in a storage locker. It's about kind of living more simply and humbly and more stress-free. And that's kind of getting us back towards that small community, small town, knowing your neighbors, know thy neighbor, love thy neighbor, locality of what's more like an indigenous community.
Now, talking about making one's way in the world and, money and material support. Rak lives in Australia. You live in California. For the two of you to get together to make an episode, there's a fair amount of money spent on airfare right there. And you also mentioned earlier that you're cutting out the middleman by going directly to the audience. But often when you bypass the middleman, you also bypass a paycheck. What's the support system for this project?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, it's an interesting point you say, because, we shot the pilot with a very small team of people. I mean, it was essentially less than 10 people. And, Rak as a facilitator typically will bring guests on this first episode during the ceremony at the end, which has, amazing footage that's some of the most profound stuff I've ever shot. The people that came down with us, some of them were guests that episode to kind of experience the medicine as Rak's kind of helping facilitate that experience, and Octavio is the actual medicine person that's giving them the medicine. But I know what you mean, man. It's like we are at this point, selling the show in the sense of we have a rental option or a download option, and it's something where we are also giving it away for free in these little chunks. But ultimately, it's something, if we want to make it a sustainable venture, we do need to make a bit of money off of so that it can kind of keep going and we can keep using the funds per episode to make the next episode. So for something that was made, we made the show for about $12,000, which, as somebody that's been on Hollywood movie sets, I can tell you is less money than they typically spend a single day for the craft budget of a large, superhero movie.
Right. And you've worked on the Matrix movies and on Avatar, right?
Yeah. I worked on 3 Academy Award-winning films. So
not small budget affairs.
No, not so much small budget affairs. And when I'm working on a $250 million, Marvel movie, I'm seeing some amazing things about it, but then I'm also seeing how not to do things and how much money is really, not used wisely. So part of my background in Hollywood is kind of seeing what not to do in a lot of ways. So I think the fact that we made something that looks like it costs maybe $250,000 for $12,000 is a huge thing to be proud of. And I think that's something that, even though it's a small budget, we do need to kind of obviously make the show something that is a sustainable venture, so we're not just draining our money like a lot of the struggles of any artist these days or independent filmmakers. So it is very much a direct audience thing where it's kind of like a book. You make something and then you go on your book tour to promote it.
Right. But are you hoping for something a bit more traditional in terms of distribution for future episodes?
Yeah, we have been chatting with a couple networks about actually getting it on their platforms. So it'll always be available at the actual website of shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. And as we keep making each episode, kind of like the podcast, and you and I have chatted about before, we don't have a set schedule for when we're going to release each episode. We're hoping to do at least one episode per year. So the second episode, hopefully, if we can get the funds down, obviously we're going to be making money off the actual funds for the sales and then doing crowdsource campaigns as well, because very much any sort of bottom-up art form these days is very much reliant on community support. So we want anybody that kind of is interested in these practices or the lineage of kind of medicine practices with indigenous cultures, that's interested in seeing what some of this stuff actually looks like, or what happens when somebody takes one of these things. This show can be a great way to kind of document that and show people to kind of consider this part of the community as like their show, where they can go and know that this is going to be something that's done by two people that get it, that understand it, and are trying to honor the material, honor the medicine people, honor the medicine, and do a very, kind of cinematic, respectful documenting of what's going on in these circles, especially with people that are listeners. So that's kind of the thing that we're hoping to ultimately do as the show continues on, which is very much reliant on the support of the community to go there and watch it and, make it something that they get a lot out of in the price of something that you could see that's an hour-long piece of entertainment at the same time that's done in a very style that very much draws you in, I would say.
You are listening to WOOL 91.5 FM, Bellows Falls, Vermont. I'm KMO, host of Sea Realm Radio, and I'm speaking with Niles Heckman, who is half the team behind a new project called Shamans of the Global Village. And you can find out more about that at the website, shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. Niles, you're also a podcaster. You've mentioned your podcast a couple times, but you haven't mentioned it by name. So let me give you the opportunity to promote that a little bit. What's your podcast?
Yeah, well, I have a podcast called Novelty Generators that is kind of stems from a gentleman named Alfred North Whitehead, who is a philosopher that had this great concept I love that basically summarized that the universe is this novelty generating engine that is always in search for kind of creativity and originality. And I love that dynamic because I think a lot of people these days, everybody is way more creative than they think. And I think a lot of people these days have their creativity stomped out of them by the modern world and what is going on with kind of education and whatnot. So the podcast kind of just focuses on people that are doing creative things at any level. And a lot of the episodes are a lot different than they kind of started out to be. I know that you've probably had a lot of growth and change in the Sea Realm since you started at KMO, but the podcast originally kind of started as one thing and it's kind of morphed in the few years that it's been around as something a bit different. But you can find it, you can go to noveltygenerators.com, which just aggregates directly to my website, where I've just got it hosted there as kind of a side tertiary thing that I do. But man, a podcast is just an absolute great way to branch out and meet new people. And it's been another amazingly wonderful, life-changing thing for me, where it's not like something that's a big moneymaker, by all means. We know how difficult it is to make money off a podcast, but just the connections made out of it and just the community built from it is beautiful. It's like something that pays you back dividends in rather unsuspecting ways.
Yeah. I am where I am, literally sitting in this chair, in this radio station, in this town, in this state, because of people I met doing the podcast.
Yeah. And that's the thing is I've found as somebody that's turning into a documentary filmmaker, I've found that so many of the people I work with or interact with or happen to be around are just such interesting people that almost everybody I've had on the podcast is somebody that I've either met through a project or am collaborating with on a future project in some way. So that's kind of the beauty of the podcast.
You've mentioned Terence McKenna a couple times, and Terence McKenna used to do what he called trialogues with Ralph Abraham and Rupert Sheldrake. And Ralph Abraham was a pioneer of computer graphics, and he was being interviewed by, I think, somebody from GQ. I think that was it. It was a very mainstream sort of magazine. And he mentioned that, a large percentage of the people who were the pioneers in computer graphics were also experienced psychedelic practitioners. And the interviewer didn't take that at face value. In fact, was quite skeptical of it. But then that same reporter went to the SIGGRAPH conference. SIGGRAPH is a special interest group in graphics, and they have an annual conference that I went to one back in the 90s in Louisiana. But this reporter went to the SIGGRAPH conference and asked around, all the old, basically the heads of state, of computer graphics. Do you have any experience with psychedelics? And I think Ralph Abraham said that 80% of them did, and this reporter concluded no, 100% of them were psychonauts. And that the psychedelic revolution of the 60s had been suppressed in a way, you know, by law enforcement and by the government. But at the same time, if you look at our movies now, and if you look at just all of our visual entertainment now, the psychonauts won. They have completely won that battle. They, you know, you could not have these, like The Matrix or these big Marvel movies, particularly something like Doctor Strange, without this infiltration of shamanism and psychedelic practice into the mainstream Western mind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and in the trailer for Doctor Strange is a film that hasn't come out yet at the time we're doing this recording, but there's a trailer for it, and I periodically work in and out of a visual effects facility that was George Lucas's facility called Industrial Light and Magic. Mm-hmm. And when I was there last, they were working on shots for Doctor Strange, and there's a scene in the trailer where this person gets hit in their assemblage point, which is basically, you know, a part of the body that's kind of tied in with the energetic systems of the body. And essentially in the trailer, they get hit in the point and they essentially kind of have a dimensional shift experience. So like you said, Kamo, beautiful. It's like, this is stuff that you would not have seen probably 30 years ago by any means in Hollywood, or if you did, it would be in very kind of encoded small doses. But on top of that, I mean, you know, this type of thing where a psychedelic experience, which is a very non-local kind of time tunnel, alternate, consciousness expanding, very perception of reality changing experience. These things, I mean, there's themes in major Hollywood movies like Avatar, for example, that are very shamanic and very psychedelic. And The Matrix, as another example, you know, these things are very successful films. So it's not like this kind of meme or this mindset is not something that is very commercially viable. And especially even in things like Star Wars that has deep mythology and kind of is looking towards the deeper things of the world. You know, there's encoded messages in a lot of these Hollywood movies, some of which, you know, you could argue is a little bit nefarious, but some of it is really like beautifully encoded in some ways. And it's nothing like the actual depth of what's encoded in some of the ancient texts that you can get. That's something like a mystical text or a hermetic text that has encoded information in it. And if you have that day-to-day development, you can really pull beautiful information out of it. But at the same time, it's like, totally, there's amazing things that you see occasionally out of Hollywood that are surprisingly switched on in that regard from at least a visual sense, maybe not so much a narrative kind of screenplay sense. But I'm sometimes really surprised by what I see coming out of Hollywood.
Well, I'm really pleased at what I see coming out of places like Netflix and Amazon and HBO now, that we have these very well-established, well-funded models of we're going to create programming for viewers, not advertisers. And we know that viewers and advertisers have very different interests. And if you watch a product that was created with advertisers in mind, you know, there's something there for you, the viewer, but there's also a lot of stuff that has been removed so as not to offend the advertiser. So I'm really pleased, you know, particularly what's coming out of Netflix right now. It's just amazing stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this show that we've created is something that is, I almost want to say it is a bit ahead of its time in the sense that it's very kind of, the context of it and the content of it is very kind of paradigm crushing. So if you do get a chance to sit down and watch it, you're going to see things in it that you've never seen before on screen. So that element of it is very exciting, but at the same time, it's not quite ready for prime time of being blasted across the front of Amazon.com or Netflix. But at the same time, I think that there's an interest in these things and a resurgence of these things where people appreciate and understand the lineage of shamanic practices. And like you mentioned, somebody like Terence McKenna would argue that having a shamanistic experience is a key component of what it really is to be a human being, that we're not designed to be going out to dinner at frickin' the Cheesecake Factory on Friday night. We may be much more designed to be in a shamanic circle on Friday night. So that's kind of the dynamic of the show, where I think some people are really understanding and coming to the I don't want to just say belief, but coming to the headspace where they kind of realize the beauty and the value and the importance of some of these direct experiences.
So the medicine that is highlighted in the first episode is 5-MeO-DMT obtained from the Sonoran desert toad. What about the subsequent episodes? What other medicines have you come into contact with in the context of the show?
Yeah, so as we highlight, I mean, every episode is going to focus on a specific person and a specific medicine, and it's going to change per episode. We have a season plan that if you go to the website, there's a PDF that actually says what it is. And I can kind of, maybe I'll open that while I'm just kind of talking here now, that just kind of goes through a list of other earth-based medicines. I don't just want to say plant-based medicines, because some of these things don't just come from plants. For example, the medicine that's in the first episode comes from a toad. And you have to kind of synchronistically ask yourself, like, why does this come from a toad? It's very interesting that certain places, some of the most beautiful things are found in some of the most odd places. But for example, you know, Rak has the large responsibility of kind of looking at who's going to be in each episode. But for example, future medicines that we're going to have in future episodes, we're going to have, we're hoping to have a pilot, not a pilot, but an episode that focuses on psilocybin mushrooms, for example. Ayahuasca is very kind of popularized now, and there was even like a recent Onion article talking about Silicon Valley tech CEOs using ayahuasca in their boardrooms.
That was a great headline. I'm going to look it up while you're talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, ayahuasca is probably going to be on, you know, an episode quite down the line. But, you know, there's also something like San Pedro cactus or Salvia divinorum, the peyote of the Native American practices, iboga, cannabis even. Cannabis even has shamanistic elements. Some of my very beautiful first shamanistic experiences were actually done with cannabis, believe it or not, because there's certain strains of the cannabis plant that are very psychoactive and can lead to beautiful visual experiences. And then there's also Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is something that is taken in the northern regions for healing purposes or consciousness expanding purposes. So all these medicines, there's also the acacias in Australia, Syrian rue in the Middle East. So the show ideally would be something that would take us around the world. And each episode, not only since we would highlight a specific person that may be living in some sort of Western country, we would maybe focus on them somewhere in, let's say, the Pacific Northwest for psilocybin mushrooms, for example. But then we'd go to the actual country where the medicine originated. So for the iboga episode, we very much would like to go to Gabon, Africa, to the Bwiti tribe, which is the original tribe that kind of is doing the work with the iboga plant, which is, iboga is actually a root. And it is an amazing healer in the sense that if you have an addiction to some sort of junk thing like narcotics, like let's say you're hooked on crack or cocaine or methamphetamine, iboga has an amazing capability to heal you cold turkey from that if you engage your will to want to heal yourself, because ultimately you can only really heal yourself. So if you use a medicine like iboga, which is a very, very purgative, strong, not recreational, very difficult experience, iboga can be a huge healer for addiction. And that's something that, you know, very likely will be on the second episode. And of course, we haven't perfectly zeroed in who's going to be the focus of each episode. So I'll leave that a little bit open to who the actual practitioners would be with each medicine. But that kind of gives you an idea for a season plan.
I found that Onion headline. It's ayahuasca shaman dreading another week of guiding tech CEOs to spiritual oneness.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no easy fixes. And that's very much a criticism of shamanism, is that you just, you know, you're in your day-to-day 9-to-5 hamster wheel, and you're going to get on a plane and go drink something, and you're going to have some experience which may be amazing or may not be as great, maybe a little underwhelming. And maybe because you didn't put as much respect into the medicine as possible, or maybe it just didn't work really well with your physicality, or maybe it just wasn't synchronistically the right time for you. But then you just go back to your normal day-to-day, and you don't actually directly change your life for the better. So something like a Silicon Valley, you know, tech CEO just taking it as boardroom, unless that person is really going through spiritual growth, which changes everything in your life when you go through a spiritual growth process. You know, the people that you used to be friends with are different, become different people. What you do day in, day out is a different process. So most people aren't willing to go through that process, and they'll go right back to their 9-to-5 job. So again, real work is tough. And, you know, these things can only give you a little preview of what you have to ultimately get to yourself.
Well, Niles, we're going to have to wrap it up here. We have reached the end of the hour. But again, I've been talking with Niles Heckman. He is the man behind the camera of a new series called Shamans of the Global Village. And I've seen the first episode. It is very impressive to look at. So well done, Niles, and please continue as you have been doing.
Yeah, thank you very much, KMO. It's a pleasure chatting with you, man, and always keep up the good work in your various efforts yourself.
Well, yeah, I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah. You as well, mate. Have a good rest of your weekend. Cheers.
Cheers. Alrighty. That brings us pretty much to the end of this episode of Sea Realm Radio. We've got just about 25 seconds left to fill. So in that time, let me invite you to join a conversation of Sea Realm podcast and radio listeners on Facebook. The Facebook group is Friends of the Sea Realm, and you'll find some neat people there. So I hope to hear and see from you. Material, conversations, contributions to the ongoing conversation from you. All right, that is all. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you again soon. And until that time, stay well.
5 Bellows Falls, community radio for the southern Vermont and New Hampshire borderlands.